discussion, The Museum of Innocence by Orhan Pamuk. This is probably one of the most important books I've ever read. And just to make it clear, I think expressing my impressions of the book in words is almost an oxymoron because it's such a good book. It hits exactly the points that I'm always making when I talk about literature. Literature tackles the big questions that science cannot answer. Literature tackles the questions that we can't just parsimoniously answer in short sentences or algorithmically program answers to them or anything like that. That's what literature is really. The profound power of literature is the ability to convey the most complex picture of life, of the human condition, in the form of, in this case it's a novel, but it's not even clear if it's a novel. It could also be an autobiography, or it could be an autobiographical novel, or Orhan Pamuk plays around with genres. He intertwines in very subtle ways and sometimes not so subtle ways. He intertwines common assumptions with very unexpected outcomes. He's a master of his craft. He's an amazing writer. I think he's also intellectually a very, very interesting person. And on top of that, he's from Turkey, so he really bridges the gap between Europe and Asia, between East and West. This novel is a literary incarnation of the Bosporus, in a true sense, and it's also it's a museum of what was and what is and what could be, in terms of what the East used to be, what the West is now, and what we could see in the future. So it really captures many aspects, and I'm going to try to convey my impressions. I'm going to try to do what I just said is probably an oxymoron, because when you have such a great piece of art, maybe you shouldn't say anything. You should just leave it alone. Let people read it and get their own impressions. But we do this, of course, for two reasons here at Orange Capital Partners. One is to keep a record for ourselves, so we want to keep a record of our impressions of the book, and second, also, we want to convey to the listeners that reading books is absolutely crucial, and it's part of the business of a hedge fund manager. And the purpose of this podcast is to give people a sense for what it feels like to run a hedge fund. So reading books is part of the business. It's not just some pastime of hedge fund managers. And this book is a beautiful example of what it means to read literature. It opens up your horizons. It inspires you. It hits you emotionally. It does all the things that art should be doing. And again, that's why I think this is one of the most important books. I would say Pamuk ranks for me at the level of a Somerset Maugham, of a Thomas Mann, of a Cormac McCarthy, at that level of a Moby Dick. I forgot the writer of Moby Dick, but like some of the seminal books written within their societies at their times. This is how important this book is to me. This is Not Even Wrong podcast. It's May 2nd, 2023. This is Krim Delco. Since the last update, we're down roughly 2%. The market's flat. The year, we're up 29.8%. The market's up 8%. We're performing by 21.8%. The Museum of Innocence by Orhan Pamuk. It's a book, again, it's a novel. It's officially a novel, but again, you can already discuss if it's actually a novel, if it's an autobiography, it's an autobiographical novel, is it just a story, did it really happen? Many, many conversations. It's definitely a historical novel in the sense that it describes Istanbul in the 1970s, and Pamuk does a phenomenal job in getting across the spirit of a city, the mechanics of a city, the society, the geography. I was just in Istanbul and actually started reading the book while I was in Istanbul, strolling around Beyoğlu, strolling around Beşiktaş, strolling around Fatih, looking at the big museums, looking at the coffee shops. I was impressed by the city. And now reading this novel, started reading it there, and now finished it about 10 days after I came back from Istanbul. It's a huge experience because you have the visual, the city, and then you have this book, which is sort of the soul of the city, conveyed to you in a literary form, and this combination is very powerful, and I can strongly encourage people to read novels like this, particularly when they travel, because understanding a place, getting the gist of a place, sometimes is difficult, and you have to be an experienced traveler to do that. And I think this novel is a great example of a way to do that, which is to go somewhere, of course, kick the tires, do it, travel your way. My way is to set up shop somewhere, typically in a very nice hotel. I like to stay in the Ritz-Carlton. This is my preferred, but you depending on your budget. But stay somewhere nice. Don't try to budget on where you stay, because it's important to feel comfortable when you're in a place, and then go out there and really, kick the tires. Don't just go to the 3 museums that TripAdvisor suggests you to go. Try to go to the side streets. Try to check, what kind of unwritten stuff is happening there. And this is part of the book. This is part of what the Museum of Innocence is trying to convey, that you can find soul and life in objects, in everyday side streets, in everyday coffee shops. They all have life. Important things might have happened in that little coffee shop next door. Doesn't look like much, but maybe 2 important people have met there and created huge things. This is something that I've learned, in my native Zurich. Places I used to hang out, like Odeon, used to be places where Lenin was hanging out, or James Joyce, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of place I live now, Palo Alto. I live right next door to the first offices of Fairchild Semiconductor, where William Shockley and his people created the transistor and created a whole industry, Silicon Valley. From across the street from where I live, those are physical representations of something that, in this case, has huge implications for the world. Sometimes it might not have such huge implications, doesn't matter, but physical things, geographies, locations, they all matter. And I think one of the messages in the book, and this is Orhan Pamuk's voice actually in the book, is that everybody should take their lives very seriously, and the things that they encounter in their lives, and the people they encounter in their lives. And this is one of the big messages. This is definitely the first message in the book. Take your life very seriously. And I mean this in a positive way, of course, not in some arrogant, lack of humility type of way, but in a way where, listen, the little salt shaker that you shared with the person that you love when you met her, that salt shaker has meaning to you. Take it seriously. It's not just a salt shaker. For you, it's not just a salt shaker. I think I'm gonna do this a lot more. Appreciate life. Appreciate the person I'm with, Zovinar, my wife, and my son, and the people around us that we love. Appreciate them. Be with them, and appreciate the locations we go. I mean, to some extent, we do that already. Most people do that, but I think this book really brings that across. So I would say this is definitely one of the first more beautiful messages of the book. I just want to be clear here. Look, this is not some sort of bullet point PowerPoint presentation or anything like that, but just to keep it simple, also for record keeping. I think it's easier for me, and hopefully also for the listeners, to have a little bit more bullet point type messages, just because again, it's just for simplicity. This book is way too interwoven and complex to dissect it down into 5 bullet points or anything like that. But again, I'm just doing this for simplicity. I think the next point I want to make is the story itself. The story is a beautiful love story. But like in many, literary oeuvres, there's a lot more to this than just love. There is definitely a picture of society, of Turkish bourgeois society of the 1970s. But more than that, I think this really reflects Turkish society as a whole. And I think Pamuk does a great job in also bridging East and West. It's a story about vanity, about greed, about status and wealth, and all these other big things that matter, particularly in a bourgeois society. I don't want to go too much into the plot, but I just want to say that there is certainly a bit of an ambivalent feeling that I have as a reader with the main characters here, which are a man and a woman. And honestly, they're both not very likable. The woman is, in my point of view, a beautiful, greedy actress, a wannabe actress or something along those lines, and shows kind of a venom type behavior that is very typical to beautiful women, particularly in the movie business. So there, I'm not sure if Pamuk is using that as a symbol for the famous, to me personally famous, Cormac McCarthy quote, which is "Beauty makes promises it can't keep." I think this, if you want to summarize this book with a subtitle, this would be the subtitle: "Beauty makes promises it cannot keep." So this is definitely part of the story. I think the other character, the male character, he's the sort of the falling in love type, rich bourgeois, and it's not clear how to look at him. Is he a hopelessly romantic man who fell in love, or is he just a decadent, rich guy who wants it his way? It's not very clear. I think Pamuk leaves that open. Pamuk, I don't know much about Orhan Pamuk. By the way, I don't know much about this novel also. I don't know the background. I'm going to do some more research, but I love to read and comment these books without having any sort of third-party input. I do my research afterwards because I'm curious and I would like to know why Pamuk wrote this book and what his thoughts are, but I have no influence other than the book itself. And I think it's just for, to keep it clean. And so I don't know where these two characters come from in terms of Pamuk's point of view, but for my sake, they're both not despicable, but certainly not likable. And I think this is another masterpiece of Pamuk, that he's able to write a pretty long novel. This is a pretty long novel, and with unlikable main characters, and you still keep reading because they're not unlikable in a sort of villain fashion. They're just unlikable in a much more subtle human fashion, and this is just how humans are, particularly when they're beautiful and rich. When you combine beauty and money and fame and status and vanity, then these things happen, and therefore it's kind of understandable. It's almost you give them a pass, even though fundamentally I would say they're not very likable. So this is as far as the story is concerned. Now I want to talk a little bit about technique. Third, the technique, just from a storyteller's perspective. Pamuk is a master at telling the story, at building characters, at sort of using literary techniques. He's combining autobiography with biography, with storytelling, and I think he's definitely getting the point across that I am a big fan of, which is there's no such thing as a biography or a novel or a short story or whatever. There is just a story, and a good story is a good story. That it doesn't really matter how we call it. This is just marketing for the publishing industry, and therefore I think Pamuk does a great job in that. And he does another thing which is phenomenal from a technique perspective. He puts a literary oeuvre, which is a book, into physical manifestation. The Museum of Innocence actually exists in Istanbul, and there are things to see there. So I think he's doing sort of a Joseph Beuys thing, where he lets the book live, he lets the art continue in people's minds and physically manifested in the museum. I wasn't aware of that when I was in Istanbul, unfortunately, so I wasn't able to go and see it, but I definitely will go back just to do that. And also, this is a little bit of a tangent, but I think had I read the novel, of course, I would have had a much different experience of Istanbul. I would have gone to Bebek, to the Bebek Hills, to Nişantaşı, to Beşiktaş, where I actually stayed in the Ritz-Carlton there. But I would have been a little bit more maybe aware of the environment of the neighborhoods of the Taksim and then Beyoğlu. I was in Beyoğlu. Beyoğlu is sort of the hot up and coming neighborhood now, where let's say I found interesting coffee shops and restaurants and those sort of things. And then another tangent, just to finish the tangents. I think Istanbul is a very, very interesting city because it has this really intriguing arch between poverty, nationalistic, Islamic, sort of backwater, and really, really avant-garde, advanced, modern type of thinking and a modern life. And I think Orhan Pamuk is the perfect manifestation of that himself. I think one of the most important writers living right now, but he's from a place that is, still relatively backward in many ways. And I think he just reflects Turkey as a whole. And I think that's an interesting observation. Fourth point, and this is really the crux of the book, I think it's about love, right? This book is about love. And I'm writing my own memoir, and I named them Love Story. My wife Zovinar continuously talks to me about the movie Love Story, which to her manifests love in the purest form. So love is pretty intense. It's an intense subject that occupies me on a daily basis. That's also why this book resonates with me. Now, when it comes to love, I think Pamuk pushes it very, very far. In other words, he's almost pushing it to the point where you're not even sure if this book is about love. On the surface, it's about love. It's about a rich person that is obsessed with a woman, and according to himself, so meaning his own record, his own words are, I love this person. And there's very little in this book that associates this person with not loving this woman. In other words, almost everything he does on the surface feels like he loves. It's about love. It's about deep, profound love. But Pamuk, I think, I don't know again if this is intentional or not, doesn't matter. This is how it comes across to me. You almost feel like this is not love, but this is obsession. This is vanity. This is a rich guy taking what he wants. And this is a beautiful woman trying to get what she wants. And of course, in the end, it's always the money that wins, and it's the venom that kills. So that's, just leave that alone. I don't want to give too much away from the plot, but it's the money that kills, the money that wins and the venom that kills. So now, Pamuk's opening up a big, big sort of vector space of potential avenues of to discuss love as it refers to this book, right? You can discuss it from the point of view of love between two people and just leave everything else alone. But then you will not get to the plot. The plot would not make any sense because love is supposed to be a beautiful thing. Love is supposed to be something that is natural. And there's nothing natural about this love. There's nothing natural about this story. So everything is incredibly difficult. It's like a root canal. It's a love story that feels like a root canal. And that's why it almost can't be about love if it's that difficult. You can look at it from the perspective, rich man loves beautiful woman, but she's not rich. That is a problem. And there are scenes in the book where that comes across, where there is almost a materialistic ask from the woman. Basically, I want you, but these are the conditions, and that again puts you off as a reader. Well, this ain't love. If it's like that, it ain't love. Then we have the question of, okay, how far is a man gonna go for love? How far is a man gonna go for love? What is he supposed to do? And then, there's also, of course, this is related, the cultural question. And I think Pamuk is trying to give the reader sort of a back door here, which is, look, maybe some of the things that this man is doing don't make sense to you, and you might think this is not love, but you have to look at it in the context of Turkish society in the 1970s, which is still very conservative. If this was in the West, if this was in Europe or the US, then this person would have done many other things. In other words, let's say you fall in love with a woman, and despite of, let's say, her being at a lower rank or lower status, you would just marry her and and go on with it. And doesn't matter what your family thinks, doesn't matter what society thinks about it, because it's about what you want. And the East, places like Turkey, they don't function like that. So this is certainly something that Pamuk opens up, and I think it's part of the story here. It's the bridge between East and West that Orhan Pamuk does really well. So to summarize, the Museum of Innocence, again, one of the most important books I've ever read. Fantastic book. I can only recommend it. The 4 points that I took away, number one, is that live your life and take it very, very seriously. Everything you see in life, everything you encounter, every object, every thought, every idea, every feeling is important. There's no such thing as something, Joe Biden's life is not more important than yours. And Nicole Kidman's life is not more important than yours. And, LeBron James's life is not more important than yours. My point is, it's your life. It's what you do. And what you do matters. No matter how crazy it might look from the outside. So this comes across in this book. Number two, we have itself, the plot is about a rich man falling in love with a woman. I just want to leave it that beauty makes promises it cannot keep. And money wins and venom kills. Those are the two things I want to say here. I don't want to give too much away about the story, but it's a story about love. I'm going to get to the point of love. I'm going to say the third thing that I take away in this book is the techniques and the actual art that Pamuk is working with, and he has a Joseph Boysian sort of approach towards putting something out there and then let it live in physical form and of course in virtual form, in idea form. Like that's very beautiful. There's actually a physical Museum of Innocence, which I find very interesting. And fourth, the actual question of love now, the actual question of love which Pamuk attacks in this book. He doesn't give you too many answers. He leaves a lot of questions open, but this is, I think, what great novelists do. And I would say, in essence, he's almost taking a negative of love. He's taking love to the extreme to show you, well, this is not love, but everything else is, or something along those lines. But he's also leaving a back door open, which is sort of the East-West conflict that, of course, all of Turkey and his books are particularly occupied with. And again, I want to just finish this podcast episode by making clear that first, this is a fantastic book, highly recommended. Here at Orange Capital Partners, we discuss books because it's part of the hedge fund manager's job to read books. And this is a perfect example of a book that can only enrich your life. Thank you.